Hey everyone, it's Daniel with Pedal Pickers. I'm here for Ask a Flower Farmer Live, and I'm here to answer your questions. Any questions you have about flower farming, or if you're a home gardener and you want to grow more flowers in your gardens at home, I'm here to answer your questions. For the next 30 minutes, there's going to be a little circle with a question mark down at the bottom of the screen. It looks like a little talking bubble. If you click that, that's where you can type in your questions, and that's where I'm going to be pulling questions from later in the live. So we'll wait for some more people to join, but thank you all for joining me today. Again, I'm Daniel Schavey with Pedal Pickers, and I'm a flower farmer. This is our 9th growing season here at the farm, which is very exciting. We've learned a lot along the way through trial and error, and I am a former student of Lisa's online courses. I've taken most of them, so if you are thinking about doing that, please check that out. That's how I got started, and it really took me from having this idea of growing flowers that I'd seen other people doing to a professional flower farmer. We actually just yesterday dropped off our first wholesale order of flowers. It was, I think, over $2,000 worth of flowers to a wholesaler that we're working with now, and they're distributing our flowers all across North and South Carolina this week. So that's very exciting, and you don't get there at first. It takes time. Like I said, this is our 9th season, but we've really kind of honed in on what we want to be growing, what works for us in our climate, and that's just something that it's a process to learn, but Lisa's courses will help you get there. So a little bit about my farm. We are located in Greenville, South Carolina. We're in the southeast of the United States, growing zone 8A. I think we used to be classified as 7B, but I've always told people we're a little warmer where our farm's located. So we're at the very base of that Appalachian Mountains. So we are pretty flat here on our farm, and we get a lot warmer than other farms just a few miles north of us. So that's where we're located. We're in full spring mode right now, so we have tons of flowers blooming at the moment. We're harvesting poppies, ranunculus, butterfly ranunculus, tulips. We grow tulips both hydroponically and in raised beds in our fields. We also have hellebores and flowering quince, and viburnum is just starting to bloom. So I hope that gives you an idea of what things are looking like on our farm right now. We're super busy this time of year, and our next big crop that's not blooming yet, but that'll be coming on, is we've planted 3,000 peonies. And one thing about our farm is we are in a great location because we are about as warm as you can get and still be able to grow most of the varieties of peonies pretty well. I try to stay away from the latest blooming peonies. I like the early and mids and some of the lates. But our peonies, I saw my first buds trying to open yesterday. And that's a little early. Those were on first year plants, which, as we know, those like to bloom a little earlier than others, but the rest of our peonies are coming out of the ground, and it looks like it may be an early season for peonies for us. So we'll see. I'm here to answer questions. So down at the bottom of the screen, there's a little talking bubble with a question mark in it. If you type your questions after clicking that, that's how I'm going to be able to pull questions in just a couple minutes. We'll get started with that. One thing I wanted to talk about today is we are actively preparing for resiliency here on the farm for this year. Last year we had a really difficult year with our dahlias, which we're known for growing dahlias across the country. We ship dahlia tubers and dahlia cuttings here in spring. If you're looking to add some to your gardens, you can head to our website at pedalpickers.com. But last year we grew 20,000 dahlias, and we had a major snafu in the middle of the summer. We were holding a lot of our dahlia tubers to plant in June. Here in the South, if you have a walk-in cooler and you can store your dahlia tubers to try to hold them a little bit longer before planting out in spring, for us in the past, it has created the best healthiest looking dahlia plants in the fall. They miss all the heat of summer because they're still coming up out of the ground and small, and then about mid to the end of September, you just get the healthiest plants you've ever seen. And that's a trick that we use here in the South. We also look for varieties that just bloom and handle our heat a little bit better. But last year, we got really, really hot in June. We were like 100 degrees for a week, and that was the week I had scheduled to plant my dahlia tubers. And the next week I was going on vacation out of town, so I couldn't hold them any longer, and we planted them all in the hot ground, and I turned my dahlia tubers into baked potatoes. So what we ended up having on hand is a lot of extra cuttings that we had been taking all winter from our dahlias. And so last year we took about 10,000 dahlia cuttings, so we rooted all those into plants, and we used that to grow extra tubers for some of our specialty varieties, or if we had some varieties that we felt like we were about to lose, we made sure to really stock up on cuttings of those to increase our stock. And then that kind of set us up and got us a lot of practice last year on rooting cuttings for dahlias. So this year we're actually selling them and we're shipping them across the country, and everything is going well with that right now. We've already shipped a couple orders out to some people who needed them early, and everything's going good. But it is leading to us really hedging our bet. So not only are we growing these dahlia cuttings for other people to send to their gardens and farms, but we're also growing more than ever for ourselves in case we run into an issue again with our dahlia tubers or losing them. And there's so many different reasons. The main reason's the weather. You just can't control the weather. We all know that. And hopefully this will give us a plan A, B, and C, so that no matter what, we are going to be there for our customers with dahlias in the fall and be able to fill our orders for all of our customers' events and weddings. And that's one thing that we're doing. This spring, we've already run into a second issue, and for the past 3 years, we've grown tulips hydroponically in our greenhouse. It's been amazing. I've showcased that on my Instagram. And this year, like many others I know, we've run into what's called stem topple. And that can be caused for a number of different reasons. I think for us, we got hot for just a few days. So our greenhouse, even though it has shade cloth on it, and we have fans running for great ventilation, the heat and humidity built up in the greenhouse for too long of a period of time. And what that causes on tulips is it can cause the plants, as they're growing, to not be able to absorb enough calcium. And since we're growing hydroponically in water, we add calcium nitrate. In the past, it's just been one time once we put the bulbs in the trays and they start growing. But I think this year with the heat wave, it kind of blocked the plants from absorbing that calcium, and then now we're left with the issue called stem topple, where the stems just kind of bend over and crinkle up. Even though it's still blooming, that's not going to work for florists, it's not going to work for homeowners, and we've tried to just remove all that as we see it happen, and any that we think might potentially have it, but it's definitely been an issue. So what we're doing for next year, I've already ordered my tulip bulbs. We're going to do it again. We're going to be resilient, just like farmers are. And we're going to split up about a third of our crop hydroponic. We're going to grow a third of our tulips in bulb crates with soil next year, because I've heard from a lot of farmer friends that they don't really have the same issues with stem topple when they're growing them in bulb crates. And then we're also going to plant a third, like we always do as well, out in our field in raised beds. Or if you didn't want to do that, you could dig a trench out in the field. But that way, we're going to hedge our bets on our tulip crop for next year, so that if we see this issue arise again, everything will be fine. We'll have other successions come into place. So luckily for us, we've started seeing that this last round of hydroponic tulips doesn't have any stem topple issues. So, the last couple weeks have been rough on us. Our first crop for Valentine's Day was perfect, like blew us away. Then we had some issues for the last 2 to 3 weeks, and now we're back on track. So anyways, all the lessons that I can throw your way to help you, any of y'all that are thinking about growing tulips hydroponically or dahlias, the best advice I can give is to hedge your bets. And it takes some experience, and it takes talking to other farmers and joining events like this, listening to me talk here, asking me questions in the question box. So I'm going to get started answering questions. Again, there's a little bubble with a question mark at the bottom of the screen. And if you have any questions you want to ask me, go in and type them in there, and let's get started. So the first question is, where do you order tulips from that are the tall varieties? So we use a lot of different suppliers. All of our suppliers are, you have to have a wholesale account, so you have to have a business license or a tax ID set up with them, and then that's where we order our bulbs from. So we like to order from Leo Burby Bulb Company, and especially if you want to order in smaller quantities, if you don't need a whole crate of 500 bulbs, you can order from Leo Burby. We order from Ball, a lot of bulbs through them, and also Ownings is out in California. We love Ownings, and we order a lot of our different bulbs across the board for our farm from them. So that's our 3 suppliers. We actually sell some of our bulbs that we order in our fall bulb sale that's at petalpickers.com. So that will get listed. If you're looking for like 10 packs and stuff, that'll get listed around August through October, and we'll be happy to ship you some of the same varieties that we grow. So you are asking which varieties are tall, and there's a lot of them. What we look at is in the bulb catalogs, we want to make sure it says 16 plus inches for the height. What I've generally found is even the ones that say 14 or 12 inches tall, they don't always get that tall. And so we look to only order varieties that are 16 inches plus. I like to also do some research and see if those varieties are able to be forced, because sometimes we run into that trialing new varieties. We'll try to force them hydroponically and they'll bloom shorter, because sometimes each individual varieties, some of them like to be forced and some of them don't. But the number one tip I can give you for having long stems on your tulips is to make sure your bulbs get the proper cooling. So here in South Carolina, zone 8A, we're a little too warm to naturally cool all of our tulip bulbs. There are some of the varieties like Darwin Hybrids is a great group of tulips to grow if you're looking to add them in your garden. They have nice, really large single blooms on them. And so the Darwin Hybrids are great, but for all the rest, we either stick them in our refrigerators or we put them in our walk-in coolers, and we pre-chill our bulbs for about 12 to 14 weeks. So they'll arrive to us usually in August, September, and then we'll keep them in the cooler for 14 weeks, and then we plant them out in the field or whatever we want to do with them. And that is how we've learned to get taller stems, especially in a warm climate. So I hope that answers your question. Next question, how can I grow Liatris for long stems? I'm sorry, I don't grow Liatris. I believe that's a bulb, and I think it's a purple flower on like a straight stem, I believe. As far as I know, you just plant the bulb per the instructions. I've always thought that was an easier bulb to grow. So I don't know any tips or tricks because I don't grow it here on my farm. In general, I see, and this is especially true, I just reviewed Dave Dowling's online course about growing bulbs. So you may want to take that through the Gardener's Workshop Farm, because I bet he talks about them in there. But I just reviewed gladiolus corms. So we have some corms coming next week. And one of the top tips that Dave gave was to make sure your bulbs get a lot of water. Gladiolus especially need 1 to 2 inches of water per week is what he was saying, which that's a little more than average of what anyone would receive from rainfall. So his tip was to make sure you have extra irrigation on your gladiolus crop. And so I wonder if that would apply to Liatris as well. Let's see, I'm going to go to the next question. I don't know everything, y'all, but bring on the questions. I'm happy to try to answer the best I can. How do you build soil in your peony beds? Does adding compost on top every year bury the roots too deep? Yes, this is a great question. To keep your soil healthy, you do want to add mulch or compost each year to your beds where you're growing stuff. What we do for our peony fields, since we know that's going to be there for a long time, and especially growing peonies in the South, we only want them covered with like at most 1 inch of soil above the eyes of the peony. So we make sure to heavily amend our beds before we plant our peony roots. So that means bringing in dump truckloads of compost and then mixing in the soil together before we plant our roots, and then we'll do that. Each year, I do notice that the organic material we bring in, such as compost or mulch, will generally break down. And so we do like to add a little bit of compost each year on top of each of our peonies. I just load up a tractor bucket with a shovel, and I put about a half scoop to full scoop of a shovel on top of each of my peonies, usually right before spring. So in like February is a good time. I just do one scoop on top, and that seems to work. And then some years I may skip. I don't think I did it this year, and it was definitely on my to-do list, but I never made it around to it. So they're gonna be fine. They look super healthy. But definitely with mulch or adding compost, you don't wanna overdo it. Just do enough and try to watch out that you're not burying that peony too deep, because if a peony gets buried too deep, it may not produce flowers. You'll still get the leaves and the foliage on the plant, but that is one of the reasons why if you have a peony that's not blooming properly or very many stems and it's been established, you may want to check to see and if you can push back the mulch or whatever. It may just be buried a little too deep. All right, next question. Do you pre-treat gladiola bulbs to prevent thrips, or what do you do if you get thrips? So I listen to everything Dave Dowling says. I've heard that you can treat your gladiola bulbs with, I think it's like an old time Lysol solution. He said a few years ago you could buy it online. I've never looked, and I believe off my memory, that was the treatment that he said. You dip your bulbs or soak them in this Lysol solution, and that's supposed to help with thrips. I have grown gladiolas before, and I actually have some coming next week, and we don't treat them. So I didn't have an issue growing the bulbs, but we did notice thrips, and there's other ways that you can treat for thrips. If you choose to use a pesticide or something, that can help, but it's just one of those things. You try to watch out, you try to harvest the flowers before they're fully open, so that all the thrips don't have time to attack the flowers. It's kind of like our sunflowers. We harvest our sunflowers before the petals actually open up, just right when they're ready, or one little petal's lifting off the center of the flower. And so with gladiolas, I like to treat that the same way. I'll wait until like one or two of the lower flowers are open and then harvest it. And if I notice any thrip damage or thrips on like the lower blooms, I may just pinch those off and allow the other ones to open up later in the cooler or at my customers. So I hope that answers your question. You can search a little more about that. Check out the Lysol solution, because that may be something that you want to do. Next question I have: new Sunlight full spectrum LED lights. How do I know how close or far away to hang them? So I actually don't use any LED lights. You're saying full spectrum, so maybe that's like the red and the blue. I'm not sure. I have some LED, just general shop lights, like the ones above my heads, but different, that I picked up at Lowe's, and I keep them right above the plants. So they're just the white lights, just like these up in the ceiling, and I keep them right above the plants. The LEDs don't emit any heat, so you're not gonna have to worry about burning your plants when you do that. And I guess if you see any issues happening to your plants, then that's going to be a sign. Just pay close attention. If your plants are acting weird and maybe getting burned, then it's too close and you'll want to lift it up. But that's how we learn. There's so many variables. I don't know what kind of lights you have. I don't know how strong they are. All of that would be a determining factor. But if they're anything like normal shop lights, start them right above your plants and then just kind of raise them up if you can. In our grow room, we have little wire chains that come down. We actually picked them up at a hydroponic shop in town, and it allows us to kind of inch our lights up if we need to, and it'll hold them in place. Or you can use chains, and you'll just have to move the links on the chains and to be able to raise your LED lights up. But I would start low and then see where you need to go. All right, next question. Okay, they are from Oregon. Hey, Oregon. I've never been to Oregon. I need to make it up there. Next question. Can stunted transplants recover when planted out in the field? So this depends on which plant you're growing. I've been listening to some information about growing celosias lately, and celosias are something that you do not want them to get root bound in trays. You don't want to hold them too long. I've grown celosia very successfully in soil blocks and in plug trays, and the soil blocks are ready a little bit faster than the plug trays are. I've definitely kept celosia too long in the trays before I plant it out, and you get a lot shorter plant and it's not as prolific. And if I hold them too long now, through experience, I know it's just better to toss those out and start over again. Let's see, right now you're probably not planting celosia. Maybe you're doing snapdragons or something. I feel like snapdragons can usually pull through, but you're asking me a question already saying that your plants don't look that great. They're already stunted. And if I had a crystal ball, I'd say they're probably not going to be the best plants that you've grown. So if you have extra seed, go in and start some if it's not too late in the season for that specific plant. That's the best advice I can. Some things pull out. Get it in the ground, plant it, give it a little extra water, maybe give it some fertilizer, and that's how you're going to learn. I've done that many times, and I've tried, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And then also we sell to Florist a lot of our flowers, and you'll be amazed at what Florist will still use. So even if we have Lisianthus and it's, like 8-10 inches tall, that's short for a Lisianthus. They don't care. They can still use it. You just have to make sure what they're using it for. If they don't need it to be tall, a lot of times florists, especially brick and mortar florists, are just cutting flower stems in half all day long. They don't need all that extra stem length for the work they're doing. So that kind of just depends on how they're going to use it. Next question. What are the most popular flowers that we sell for Mother's Day? And that is peonies. So I may have gotten sidetracked, but for us in South Carolina, in the upstate, we're still cool enough to be able to grow most of the peonies, but we're actually one of the first places in the country that has peonies available. So by the time Mother's Day rolls around, we've already harvested 90% of our crop, and it's just a few of the later varieties like Sarah Bernhardt that are still blooming for us after Mother's Day. So that is by far, we actually hoard peony stems in our cooler for about 3 weeks, usually each season. And we sell them all the week of Mother's Day. So that is our most popular flower. If you're further north in the country and you're not going to have peonies for Mother's Day, then ranunculus is a great flower. Also, I think a lot of people can get snapdragons to bloom by Mother's Day. For us, our campanula is blooming for Mother's Day, but that's totally going to depend on what part of the country you're at as to what's blooming. Next person said, I've had great germination with my seedling indoors, but some have stayed small and stunted, mainly stocked since February. The room temperature, okay, I can see more. is 60s, daily watering, weekly fertilizing, lights on a day. Any suggestions what could be wrong? It sounds like you're holding stock in trays since February. I think you're gonna find you should have already planted it out in the ground outdoors. I don't know your climate, but plants really don't like to be held. If you ever notice, like in soil blocks or plug trays, if your plants, you're starting from seed and they're starting to grow and then they just stop for a few weeks, that's generally a sign. Or if the bottom leaves are turning yellow, that's a sign that you're holding them too long and they wanted to already be in the ground by then. So if they stop growing, it's probably you should get them in the ground. Unfortunately, stock is one of those plants that doesn't. It's like celosia. Once you hold it too long, it's not going to be great results. You're not going to have a good end product because they were stunted during the early part of their growth. So I hope that helps answer your question. Wish I had a magic wand I could make plants keep growing the way they wanted to. It's all trial and error. I've made all of these mistakes in the past, and some on accident, and some I just didn't know any better. So that's how we learn. Next question, you've reorganized your farm a lot this past year. What perennials didn't get replanted? So actually I yanked a ton of perennials a few years ago, and now I'm starting to put more back in. So like, oh my gosh, but I needed more room for peonies, and I just didn't realize when I started farming how good and how like specialized peonies would be for my farm, and the fact that I can sell, if I had 100 acres of peonies, I could sell them all as long as I had enough people to harvest them, because we could ship them to florists all over the country and it would just never be able to satisfy the need for peonies for Mother's Day. So we took out a whole section of different perennials. Each row was a different perennial. Some of those that we took out, see, I've taken out gladiolus in the past because they can get thrips pretty easily, but we're planting more again this year. I've taken out agapanthus. I just could not get them to grow. I really think they prefer a more sandy soil, more well draining than our clay soil here. And I don't really see a lot of agapanthus growing at people's houses as I drive around town. So I always use that as a clue. If there's certain things that we see in gardens and stuff online, if they're not growing in the city that you live in, if you don't see that common in people's yards, that's a good sign there's a reason why. And they may just not grow well. You can try to force and mimic different conditions, but I always find it's easier to grow stuff that's easier to grow. So agapanthus was one. Oh my gosh, we have some phlox right now that I have a white phlox, but then when we put it in our cooler, it kind of turns like a lavender color, and so I always sell it as white for weddings, and then all the florists complain because it kind of turned a tinge of purple. So I'm kind of going to get rid of the phlox, and then it shatters petals too. And my farm's focused now more on more stuff that can ship, because that is a service that we offer. And so sometimes I like to get rid of, I've gotten rid of yarrow in the past. I had a lot of different types of yarrow, and then just this year I planted another section of yarrow. So sometimes this past year I've been moving stuff around. I've planted some milkweeds like asclepias, and I've gotten rid of stuff like that because it always got some kind of aphids or bugs or something later in the season. Anything that's sticky, I don't like harvesting that. The florists don't usually buy it as much, so I get rid of that. Yeah, so I hope that's a few examples. We're reorganizing our farm because just over the years things have been placed around and scattered, and I'm really trying to focus on streamlining this year. Okay, just a couple more questions. I'm already out of time. Can you plant ranunculus for fall bloom? I don't think I can in South Carolina. I saw where someone can do it up in like Michigan or Minnesota. I saw someone do it last year, and I almost wonder if that was just the right conditions that year for them to do it. Typically, I don't see that. That's one of those things that if you ever wanted to try it, knock yourself out, is not going to be easy, and I don't think you're going to see consistent results with that. But you may be able, if you're in a more northern climate, it technically may be possible. Okay, do you trim the tops of glads or leave the long stems alone? Great question. When we ship them in boxes and mix them into bouquets, we cut the tops off. And if we're selling them here locally, I usually don't. I leave the tops, and then if it's going to a florist, they can do whatever they want with them. But I think either way is really acceptable. So it does, I always try to cut like at the right angle so it's not as apparent when I cut the tops off a gladiolus. But in my house, I leave the ends. I think they're pretty. Okay, I ordered a 178 plug tray sunflowers in Miracle Grow on heat mat. Lisa's room reaches 60 to 70 degrees. Only 50 came up. Any suggestions? Sunflowers are great. They're easy to grow in a warm room. I don't know how many, 178 tray. I would check where you got your seeds from. So if you picked up the seeds at a box store, they could be old. They probably weren't stored properly. If you're doing black oil sunflower seeds from a tractor store, that's not what we grow. We make sure we order from reputable sources. And then it may not be that the seed's bad. Maybe they didn't get enough water. Maybe it's just not warm enough. I always like to dig up the seeds and see what's going on. Maybe they're just a little delayed. But whenever we're starting seeds, we want to make sure our soil medium is moist. And if it's a summer annual like sunflowers, we want to make sure that the room we're growing them in is warm. So our grow room's located right behind this wall that we actually have sunflowers in starting right now. And that room gets up to 80 degrees. So maybe 65 is a little too cool and stuff's going a little slow. But generally in 80 degrees, our sunflowers are taking like 2 days to germinate and start popping up out of the soil. Couple more questions. I can't answer about, someone's asking about preen. We don't really use preen. I think that's a weed control thing. So your lupines were started under grow lights and are thriving. Was preen a mistake? And maybe that's a typo, but it sounds like your plants are doing great. So it probably wasn't too bad. Someone said, I've been concerned about your farm and the fires in South Carolina. Hope you are okay. Thank you. Yeah, we do have some wildfires going on around us right now. Our farm is way far south. We haven't seen smoke. We haven't smelt anything. The wind's blowing it in a different direction. But really close to here, just right up the road. Yeah, it's really sad. It's over 1,000 acres. I think I keep watching and talking to my friends that live in the northern part of the county. Okay. Last question. Should I harden off my cool flowers that I plan to plant out the first week of April? Yes. Harden them off. The sun is already much stronger than it was just 6 to 8 weeks ago. We learned that planting out our first row, our first succession of sunflowers. And we grew the sunflowers in this grow room so they didn't have any natural sun hitting them. And then I moved them outside for like 1 day before we planted them, and they all started wilting. Even though the soil was wet, we had watered the transplants before we put them in the ground. They all started wilting because the sun was just too intense for them. So you want to make sure you harden off from now all the way till the end of the season. Any transplants you're wanting to put in the ground, if you're growing them in a grow room, harden them off for about a week. Just get them outside. You can start them in a little bit of sun and then move them to brighter sunny locations before you plant them out in the field. And you should be good to go. My last tip is, this took us a couple years to really get down. When you're planting any transplant into the ground, make sure your soil is moist before you plant the transplant. Don't ever plant your transplants into dry soil thinking that you're just gonna water it with a hose after you plant. You wanna water before you plant the transplant in the ground, and then water it again to get it settled in. So that's my number one tip. I killed thousands and thousands and thousands of plants before I really figured that out. And now nobody on this farm plants transplants unless the soil is already wet. So we try to wait till right after it rains, or I'll even run our drip tape irrigation lines overnight and come back out to like a flooded row and then plant our transplants in there. And that has made transplanting so much better and successful for us here at Petal Pickers. So thank y'all all for joining today. I appreciate it. We ship flowers nationwide. We ship dahlia tubers and dahlia rooted cuttings and heirloom mum cuttings nationwide. So check out our website at petalpickers.com, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks.